Margaret Chin had always been different from other military wives. While most spouses waited at home during deployments, she found herself drawn to the front lines of military medicine. Her journey began 23 years ago when she was just a young nurse fresh out of college, eager to serve her country in whatever way possible. The military hospital in San Diego bustled with activity that Tuesday morning in 1999. Margaret adjusted her crisp white uniform as she walked through the corridors, her badge identifying her as a lieutenant in the Navy Medical Corps. She had volunteered for the most challenging assignment available, working with Special Operations Forces who returned from missions with injuries that regular hospitals rarely saw. Her first encounter with Navy SEALs came during a mass casualty event. A training exercise had gone wrong, and 6 SEALs were rushed into the emergency room with various injuries ranging from broken bones to severe burns. The other nurses seemed intimidated by these elite warriors, but Margaret saw them simply as patients who needed care. "Ma'am, I can wait," said Petty Officer Rodriguez, despite the fact that his arm was clearly broken and bleeding through his uniform. The SEAL code of putting others first was evident even in their pain. "Nonsense," Margaret replied firmly but kindly. "You're hurt, and that's what matters right now." She began cleaning his wounds with gentle efficiency, her hands steady and sure. "What happened out there?" As she worked, Rodriguez explained how a helicopter training exercise had experienced mechanical failure. The team had to make an emergency landing in rough terrain. Despite their own injuries, each SEAL had helped carry their wounded teammates to safety before seeking medical attention for themselves. Margaret listened intently while she set his arm, impressed by their dedication to each other. She had heard stories about SEAL brotherhood, but seeing it firsthand made her respect for these men grow exponentially. When she finished treating Rodriguez, she moved on to the next injured SEAL, then the next, working tirelessly through the night. Word spread quickly through the SEAL community about the Navy nurse who treated them with exceptional care and professionalism. Unlike other medical personnel who sometimes seemed nervous around Special Operations Forces, Margaret treated them with the same compassion she showed all patients, while maintaining the respect due to their elite status. Over the following months, Margaret became the go-to medical officer for SEAL teams returning from overseas missions. Her reputation grew not just for her medical skills, but for her discretion and understanding of the unique challenges these warriors faced. She never asked about classified missions, but she could read between the lines when treating certain injuries. One particular case stood out in her memory. A SEAL team had returned from Afghanistan with their teammate Sergeant Williams in critical condition. He had taken shrapnel to protect civilians during a rescue operation. The other team members were devastated, blaming themselves for not being able to prevent his injury. Margaret worked alongside the surgeons for 12 hours straight, monitoring Williams' vital signs and ensuring he received the best possible care. When he finally stabilized, she noticed his teammates hadn't left the waiting area. They had been there all night, refusing to go home until they knew their brother would survive. "He's going to make it," Margaret told them, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "But he'll need extensive rehabilitation." The team leader, a gruff Master Chief named Thompson, looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Thank you, ma'am. You saved our brother." From that moment, Margaret wasn't just a medical officer to the SEAL community, she was family. They began inviting her to team barbecues and holiday celebrations. She met their wives and children, becoming an integral part of their extended military family. Margaret's dedication went beyond her official duties. She started a support group for SEAL families, helping wives cope with the stress of deployments and the constant worry about their husbands' dangerous missions. She organized care packages for overseas deployments and created a network of resources for families dealing with combat-related injuries. Her work caught the attention of senior military leadership. Admiral Patterson, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, called her into his office one afternoon. Margaret sat nervously, wondering if she had somehow overstepped her bounds in caring for the SEAL teams. "Lieutenant Chin," the Admiral began, his weathered face serious, "I've been receiving reports about your exceptional service with our Special Operations Forces." Margaret's heart raced, unsure whether this was praise or criticism. Sir, I've simply been doing my job to the best of my ability. Admiral Patterson smiled, the first time Margaret had seen him display any emotion. Lieutenant, what you've been doing goes far beyond your job description. The SEAL teams speak of you with the highest respect. That's not something easily earned in their community. He went on to explain that Margaret was being recommended for accelerated promotion and specialized training in combat medicine. The Navy wanted to utilize her unique skills and the trust she had built with Special Operations Forces. Margaret accepted the opportunity without hesitation. She underwent additional training in field medicine, learning to treat combat injuries in hostile environments. The training was intense, pushing her physical and mental limits, but she persevered with the same determination that had earned her the SEALs' respect. Her new role took her to forward operating bases in Iraq and Afghanistan, where she worked directly with SEAL teams during their missions. She was often the only medical personnel available when teams were injured far from traditional medical facilities. The first time she deployed with a SEAL team, Margaret felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She was accompanying Team 6 on a humanitarian mission to provide medical care to Afghan villagers while gathering intelligence on terrorist activities in the region. Master Chief Thompson, now a close friend, briefed her on the mission. "Doc," he said, using the nickname the SEALs had given her, "we're going into a hot zone. There might be enemy contact. You sure you're ready for this?" Margaret checked her medical supplies one final time. "I've trained for this moment my whole career. Let's go help some people." The helicopter ride to the village was tense. Margaret could see the focused concentration on each SEAL's face as they mentally prepared for whatever challenges awaited them. She felt honored to be trusted with such an important mission. When they arrived at the village, Margaret immediately set up a makeshift medical clinic. Word spread quickly that an American doctor had come to help, and soon a line of villagers formed outside her treatment area. She worked tirelessly, treating everything from infected wounds to malnourished children. The SEALs provided security while she worked, but they also helped translate when local interpreters weren't available. Margaret was amazed at how these elite warriors could be so gentle with frightened children while remaining constantly alert for potential threats. During her second day in the village, intelligence reports indicated that Taliban fighters were moving toward their position. The mission commander made the difficult decision to extract the team immediately. "Doc, we need to go now," Thompson urgently whispered to Margaret as she finished treating a young girl's infected leg wound. Margaret quickly packed her supplies while explaining to the villagers through an interpreter that she would return as soon as possible. The disappointment in their eyes broke her heart, but she knew the safety of the team had to come first. The extraction was harrowing. As their helicopter lifted off, Taliban fighters began shooting from the surrounding hills. Margaret found herself pressed against the aircraft floor while bullets pinged off the armored hull. Despite the danger, her primary concern was for the injured villagers they were leaving behind. Back at base, Margaret couldn't stop thinking about the people who still needed medical care. She approached the mission commander with a proposal to return to the village with additional medical supplies and a larger security team. "Ma'am, that area is too dangerous now," the commander explained. "The Taliban know we were there. They'll be waiting for us to come back." Margaret understood the military reasoning, but her medical oath compelled her to find another solution. She spent the next 2 weeks developing a plan to train local villagers in basic medical care, allowing them to help their community without requiring American personnel to return to the dangerous area. Her innovative approach impressed senior commanders and became a model for future humanitarian missions. Margaret had found a way to fulfill her medical mission while respecting operational security requirements. As her deployment continued, Margaret participated in dozens of missions with various SEAL teams. Each experience taught her something new about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service. She witnessed these elite warriors risk their lives repeatedly to protect innocent people, and she felt privileged to support their efforts. One mission would change everything, though she didn't know it at the time. Intelligence had identified a Taliban commander who was planning a major attack on coalition forces. Margaret's team was tasked with capturing him and gathering intelligence about the planned operation. The mission required infiltrating a heavily defended compound in the mountains of Afghanistan. Margaret would accompany the team to provide immediate medical support if anyone was injured during the assault. As they approached the target area, Margaret felt the familiar pre-mission tension that always preceded dangerous operations. The SEALs were focused and professional, but she could sense their awareness that this mission carried higher risks than usual. "Doc, stay close to me once we're inside," Thompson instructed. "If things go sideways, your job is to stay alive so you can help whoever gets hurt." Margaret nodded, understanding that her survival was essential to the team's welfare. She had learned to balance her natural instinct to help injured people with the tactical necessity of protecting herself so she could continue helping others. The compound was larger than expected, with multiple buildings and defensive positions. As the SEALs moved through the area, Margaret followed closely behind, her medical bag ready for immediate use. Everything changed in an instant when the team entered the main building. The explosion came without warning. A hidden improvised explosive device detonated as the SEAL team entered the main building of the compound. Margaret was thrown backward by the blast, her ears ringing and vision blurred from dust and debris. Through the chaos, she heard voices calling out. Training kicked in immediately, overriding her disorientation. Margaret grabbed her medical bag and crawled toward the sounds of injured teammates. The building structure had partially collapsed, creating a maze of rubble and twisted metal. "Doc! Over here!" She heard Petty Officer Martinez calling from somewhere in the darkness. Following his voice, Margaret found him trapped under a fallen beam, his leg clearly broken and bleeding severely. "I'm here," she called back, already assessing his injuries by feel since visibility was limited. "Can you feel your toes?" "Yes, ma'am, but it hurts like hell," Martinez replied through gritted teeth. Margaret quickly established an 4-line and administered pain medication while applying pressure to control his bleeding. Around them, she could hear other team members calling out positions and injuries. The professional calm in their voices despite the circumstances amazed her. "Thompson! Sound off!" came the voice of the team leader, Lieutenant Commander Jackson. "Here, sir!" Minor cuts and bruises. Moving to assist Doc with casualties. As Thompson reached their position, Margaret was already preparing a splint for Martinez's leg. "I need help moving him to a more secure location," she told Thompson. This whole section could collapse. Working together, they carefully extracted Martinez from the debris and moved him to a more stable area of the building. Margaret continued her assessment, while Thompson provided security, constantly watching for enemy fighters who might take advantage of their vulnerable situation. "Sir, we've got multiple injuries," Thompson reported over his radio. "Need immediate extraction." Margaret could hear the frustration in his voice. The planned extraction point was now compromised by the explosion, and the team was pinned down in a partially destroyed building with injured members. "Doc, how many wounded?" Jackson asked as he reached their position, blood trickling down his face from a head wound. "Sir, you need medical attention too," Margaret said, noting his injury while still treating Martinez. "I'm fine. Focus on the others first." This was typical SEAL mentality, leaders caring for their men before themselves. Margaret quickly triaged the injuries, determining that Martinez had the most serious wounds requiring immediate attention, while Jackson and 2 other team members had minor injuries that could wait. As she worked, enemy fire began hitting the building. The Taliban fighters had realized the Americans were trapped and were moving in to finish them off. Margaret found herself treating patients while bullets whizzed overhead, a situation she had trained for but never experienced. "Doc, we need to move," Jackson said urgently. "This position isn't sustainable." Margaret looked at Martinez, who was stable but unable to walk. Moving him would be dangerous, but staying would be deadly for all of them. She made the difficult decision to administer strong pain medication that would allow Martinez to be moved despite his injuries. "Give me 2 minutes to prepare him for transport," she told Jackson. Those 2 minutes felt like hours as enemy fire intensified around them. Margaret worked with laser focus, securing Martinez's splint and ensuring his 4-line wouldn't be disconnected during movement. Her hands remained steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "Ready," she announced. The team executed a fighting withdrawal, with 2 SEALs carrying Martinez while others provided covering fire. Margaret stayed close to her patient, monitoring his vital signs while moving through the dangerous terrain. The extraction to the landing zone was harrowing. Margaret found herself crawling through rocky terrain while maintaining medical equipment and keeping pace with elite warriors who were trained for this exact scenario. Her years of physical training and mental preparation were being tested to their limits. When they finally reached the extraction point, Margaret immediately reassessed all the injured team members. Martinez remained stable, but Jackson's head injury was worse than initially thought. She suspected he might have a concussion from the blast. "Sir, I need you to sit down and let me examine you properly," she told Jackson. "Negative. Document need to ensure everyone else gets out first." Margaret realized she was witnessing the leadership quality that made SEAL officers exceptional. Even injured, Jackson's first priority was his team's welfare. She admired this dedication while simultaneously worrying about his medical condition. The rescue helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, but those 20 minutes felt eternal as Margaret worked to stabilize her patients while the team maintained defensive positions around the landing zone. Enemy fighters were still pursuing them, making the extraction extremely dangerous. As the helicopter landed, Margaret helped load Martinez first, then insisted that Jackson receive immediate medical attention during the flight. She worked in the cramped aircraft cabin while the helicopter maneuvered evasively to avoid enemy fire. "Doc, you saved my life back there," Martinez said weakly as Margaret adjusted his fore. "You guys would have done the same for me," she replied simply. But Thompson, who was also in the aircraft, looked at her with something approaching awe. "Ma'am, what you did back there, most people would have frozen up. You kept working under fire like it was just another day at the hospital." Margaret didn't see her actions as particularly heroic. She had simply done what her training and medical oath required. But to the SEALs, she had proven herself under the most extreme conditions possible. Back at the base hospital, Margaret continued treating the injured team members while debriefing with intelligence officers about what they had observed in the compound before the explosion. Despite the mission's complications, they had gathered valuable information about planned Taliban attacks. Admiral Patterson visited the hospital the next day to check on the injured SEALs and speak with Margaret about the mission. She expected a routine debrief, but his expression was more serious than usual. "Commander Chen," he began, using her new rank which had been approved during her deployment, "yesterday's mission has been classified at the highest levels. What I can tell you is that the intelligence gathered potentially saved hundreds of coalition lives." Margaret felt a surge of pride, not for herself but for the team that had risked everything to complete their mission despite the unexpected complications. "However," the Admiral continued, "there's something else we need to discuss. The SEAL community has submitted a formal recommendation regarding your actions during the mission." Margaret's stomach tightened, wondering if she had somehow violated protocol during the emergency situation. Admiral Patterson smiled, noting her concerned expression. "Commander, you're being recommended for the Bronze Star Medal for your actions under enemy fire. The team unanimously agreed that your medical expertise and courage saved lives yesterday." Margaret was stunned. She had simply done her job, but apparently the SEALs saw something more in her actions. The Bronze Star was a significant military decoration, rarely awarded to medical personnel who weren't directly engaged in combat operations. "Sir, I don't know what to say. I was just doing what any medical officer would do." "No, Commander. What you did was exceptional. You provided life-saving medical care while under direct enemy fire, adapted to changing tactical situations, and demonstrated the kind of courage we expect from our finest warriors." The news of Margaret's recommendation spread quickly through the Special Operations community. SEALs from other teams began seeking her out, wanting to meet the medical officer who had earned such high praise from Team 6. Margaret found this attention somewhat uncomfortable. She had never sought recognition for her work, preferring to focus on patient care rather than accolades. But she began to understand that her actions had symbolic importance for the entire SEAL community. Master Chief Thompson explained it to her one evening as they sat in the base cafeteria. "Doc, you don't understand what you represent to us. You're proof that our medical personnel will never abandon us, no matter how bad things get." This conversation helped Margaret realize that her role extended beyond individual patient care. She had become a symbol of the medical community's commitment to Special Operations Forces, and that carried both honor and responsibility. Over the following weeks, Margaret noticed a change in how she was treated throughout the base. Regular Navy personnel showed her increased respect, and even senior officers seemed to regard her differently. Word had spread about her actions during the mission, though the specific details remained classified. More importantly to Margaret, the SEAL teams began involving her in mission planning discussions. They valued her input on medical contingencies and risk assessment, treating her as an integral part of their operational planning rather than just a support element. This integration into the tactical planning process gave Margaret new insights into the complexity of special operations missions. She began to understand the countless variables that commanders had to consider when planning operations in hostile territory. Her recommendations led to improved medical protocols for SEAL missions, including better field medical equipment and enhanced training for team medics. Margaret's combination of frontline experience and medical expertise made her uniquely qualified to identify areas for improvement. The Bronze Star ceremony took place 6 weeks later at Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters. Margaret had hoped for a small, private ceremony, but Admiral Patterson insisted on a formal presentation with the entire SEAL community in attendance. As Margaret stood at attention while the Admiral read the citation, she looked out at the assembled SEALs and saw faces she recognized from countless missions and medical treatments. These were the men she had served with, bled with, and earned the respect of through shared hardship and mutual dedication. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an armed enemy, the Admiral read. Commander Margaret Chin displayed exceptional courage and medical expertise while under direct enemy fire, saving the lives of multiple special operations personnel and ensuring the successful completion of a critical intelligence mission. When the medal was pinned to her uniform, the assembled SEALs erupted in applause. Margaret felt overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment, realizing that this ceremony represented not just personal recognition, but acknowledgement of the vital role medical personnel play in special operations. After the ceremony, Margaret was approached by dozens of SEALs who wanted to congratulate her personally. Many shared stories of how her medical care had helped them, or their teammates, reinforcing her understanding of the lasting impact her work had on their community. The celebration continued into the evening, with Margaret joining the traditional post-ceremony gathering at a local restaurant popular with SEAL teams. She found herself surrounded by some of the military's most elite warriors, all treating her as an equal and expressing genuine appreciation for her service. As the evening wound down, Lieutenant Commander Jackson, now fully recovered from his injuries, approached Margaret with a serious expression. "Doc, there's something the team wanted to give you." He handed her a small box containing a specially crafted Navy SEAL trident pin. But this wasn't a regulation pin, it was a custom piece created by the team, with Doc engraved below the traditional eagle, anchor, and trident symbol. "Ma'am, this is from all of us. You've earned your place in our brotherhood," Jackson said solemnly. Margaret held the pin with trembling hands, understanding the significance of the gift. The SEAL trident was sacred to these warriors, representing their elite status and unbreakable bonds. For them to create a custom version specifically for her was the highest honor she could imagine. That night, as Margaret reflected on her journey from a young Navy nurse to a decorated Special Operations medical officer, she realized that her true reward wasn't the Bronze Star or the recognition from senior leadership. It was the trust and respect of the SEALs she had served with, men who represented the very best of American military courage and dedication. But Margaret's story was far from over. Her reputation in the Special Operations community would soon lead to even greater challenges and responsibilities, testing her in ways she never imagined possible. 3 years after receiving the Bronze Star, Commander Margaret Chin found herself facing the most challenging assignment of her military career. The Pentagon had selected her to lead a new medical unit specifically designed to support Joint Special Operations missions worldwide. The position would require her to coordinate medical support for SEALs, Delta Force, Rangers, and other elite units across multiple theaters of operation. The briefing took place in a secure conference room at the Pentagon, with representatives from each branch of Special Operations Command present. Margaret sat at a polished mahogany table, reviewing classified documents that outlined her new responsibilities. General Morrison, commander of Joint Special Operations Command, addressed the assembled officers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're establishing the Special Operations Medical Support Unit. This unit will provide rapid medical response capabilities for our most sensitive missions worldwide." Margaret listened intently as the general outlined the scope of the new unit. She would be responsible for training medical personnel from all service branches, developing new protocols for treating combat injuries in remote locations, and personally leading medical teams on the most critical missions. "Commander Chen," General Morrison continued, "your reputation in the SEAL community and your proven performance under fire make you the ideal candidate to lead this unit. However, I want you to understand the challenges you'll face." The general went on to explain that Margaret would be working with special operations forces from different branches, each with their own cultures, procedures, and expectations. Building the same level of trust and respect she had earned with the SEALs would require starting over with Army Rangers, Delta Force operatives, and Air Force Special Operations personnel. "Sir, I understand the challenges," Margaret replied. "But I believe good medicine and dedication to our people transcend service rivalries. If we focus on saving lives, the rest will follow." Her first assignment was to establish a training facility at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where medical personnel from all services would learn to work together. Margaret spent weeks developing curriculum that combined the best practices from each branch while maintaining the high standards expected in special operations. The initial training class included Navy corpsmen, Army medics, and Air Force pararescuemen. Margaret could feel the tension in the room during the first session as personnel from different services eyed each other suspiciously, each believing their branch had superior medical training. "I know you all think your service has the best medical training," Margaret began, addressing the elephant in the room immediately. "You're all right. Each service has developed excellent capabilities based on their specific mission requirements. Our job is to combine those strengths into something even better." She spent the first week having each service demonstrate their medical procedures and equipment. The Navy corpsmen showed their expertise in treating blast injuries and penetrating wounds common in SEAL operations. Army medics demonstrated their skills in treating mass casualties and operating in austere environments. Air Force pararescuemen displayed their abilities in high-altitude rescues and prolonged medical care during long-distance evacuations. By the end of the week, the competitive atmosphere had transformed into mutual respect as each group recognized the unique skills the others brought to the team. Margaret had successfully broken down service barriers by focusing on their shared commitment to saving lives. The real test came during the first joint training exercise. Margaret designed a scenario where a mixed special operations team was injured during a simulated mission in hostile territory. Medical personnel from all services had to work together to provide care while under simulated enemy fire. Initially, the exercise was chaotic. Different services used different terminology, equipment, and procedures. Margaret watched from the observation tower as medics struggled to communicate effectively while treating simulated casualties. "Stop!" Margaret called over the loudspeaker. "Everyone gather around the casualties." She climbed down from the observation tower and joined the medical team in the field. "What just happened here wasn't anyone's fault. We're speaking different languages even though we're all Americans. Let's fix that." Margaret spent the next hour having each service explain their procedures in simple terms that everyone could understand. She created standardized terminology and established clear communication protocols that all services could use effectively. When they repeated the exercise, the improvement was dramatic. Medical personnel worked seamlessly together, combining their different skills and equipment to provide superior patient care. Margaret felt proud watching Army medics and Navy corpsmen working as a unified team. Word of the successful training program reached senior leadership quickly. Within 6 months, Margaret's unit was being requested to support actual missions worldwide. Her first major deployment was to support a joint operation in Syria, where multiple special operations units were working together to capture high-value terrorist targets. The mission required Margaret's team to establish a forward medical facility capable of treating casualties from any of the participating units. She selected medical personnel from each service for the deployment, ensuring her team could effectively support SEALs, Rangers, Delta Force, and Special Operations aviators. The forward medical facility was established in an abandoned school building near the Syrian border. Margaret's team worked around the clock to convert classrooms into operating rooms, recovery wards, and supply storage areas. The facility had to be ready to handle multiple casualties simultaneously while remaining mobile enough to relocate quickly if enemy forces discovered their location. On the third night of the deployment, Margaret's skills were put to the ultimate test. A joint raid on a terrorist compound resulted in multiple casualties from different units. A helicopter carrying wounded Rangers and SEALs landed at Margaret's facility just as another aircraft arrived with injured Delta Force operatives. The next 6 hours tested everything Margaret had learned about leadership, medicine, and military operations. She coordinated her mixed-service medical team while personally treating the most critically injured patients. Her training facility exercises had prepared the team while Navy corpsmen worked alongside Army medics without any hint of service rivalry, focused entirely on saving lives. Master Chief Thompson, now serving as a senior enlisted advisor, was among the wounded SEALs brought to Margaret's facility. He had taken shrapnel to his chest and abdomen during the raid. As Margaret worked to stabilize him, Thompson looked up at her with a weak smile. "Doc, seems like I'm always ending up on your table," he joked despite his pain. "That's because you keep volunteering for the dangerous missions," Margaret replied, her hands steady as she inserted chest tubes to treat his pneumothorax. "Stop getting shot and I won't have to keep patching you up." Their easy banter helped calm the other wounded personnel, demonstrating the trust and familiarity that had developed over years of working together. But Margaret was equally focused on treating the Rangers and Delta operatives she was meeting for the first time. Sergeant First Class Williams, a Delta Force medic who had been wounded while treating other casualties, watched Margaret work with obvious admiration. "Ma'am, I've heard stories about you from the SEAL community, but seeing you work, it's impressive." Margaret continued treating patients while talking with Williams. "Sergeant, good medicine is good medicine regardless of what unit patch you wear. Your training is excellent, we're just combining our knowledge to help more people." By dawn, all the wounded personnel had been stabilized and evacuated to higher levels of medical care. Margaret's facility had successfully treated casualties from 4 different special operations units simultaneously, proving that joint medical operations could be both effective and efficient. General Morrison visited the facility 2 days later to personally assess the unit's performance. Margaret briefed him on the casualty treatment, while walking through the medical facility, explaining how different service medical capabilities had been combined to improve patient outcomes. "Commander, your team's performance has been exceptional," the general said. "But I have a new challenge for you. We're planning the largest joint special operations mission since World War II, and we need your unit to provide medical support." The mission, codenamed Operation Desert Shield, involved coordinating attacks on terrorist training camps across 3 countries simultaneously. Margaret's medical unit would need to support operations in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, requiring her to split her team across multiple locations while maintaining the ability to rapidly reinforce any location that experienced heavy casualties. Planning for Operation Desert Shield took 3 months. Margaret worked with operations planners to identify optimal locations for forward medical facilities, calculated medical supply requirements for extended operations, and trained additional medical personnel to ensure adequate coverage across all 3 theaters. The complexity of the mission required Margaret to develop new procedures for coordinating medical evacuations across international borders and different command structures. She also had to ensure her medical teams could communicate effectively with pilots from different services who would be conducting medical evacuations. 2 weeks before the mission launch, Margaret received devastating personal news. Her husband, Captain David Chen, had been killed in a training accident at the Naval Test Pilot School. The couple had been married for 15 years, and David had been her strongest supporter throughout her military career. Margaret was granted emergency leave to attend David's funeral, but she insisted on returning to duty immediately afterward to prepare for Operation Desert Shield. Her dedication impressed everyone who knew her, but close friends worried about her emotional state. Master Chief Thompson, now recovered from his injuries, approached Margaret the day before the mission launch. "Doc, are you sure you're ready for this? No one would blame you if you needed more time." Margaret looked at her longtime friend and colleague with determination in her eyes. "Chief, David understood the importance of our mission. He would want me to be here, taking care of our people. That's how I'm going to honor his memory." Thompson nodded, understanding that Margaret was channeling her grief into renewed dedication to her duty. The SEAL community had rallied around her during her loss, offering support and understanding in the way that military families do during times of crisis. The night before Operation Desert Shield launched, Margaret gathered her medical teams for a final briefing. Looking at the assembled Navy corpsmen, Army medics, and Air Force pararescuemen, she felt proud of how far they had come as a unified unit. "Tomorrow we're going to support the largest joint special operations mission in decades," Margaret began. "Our job is simple: bring everyone home. We've trained for this moment, and I have complete confidence in each of you." She paused, thinking about David and all the sacrifices military families make in service to their country. "We're not just medical personnel tomorrow. We're guardians, protectors, and lifelines for the finest warriors America has ever produced. Let's make sure we're worthy of their trust." The medical teams dispersed to their deployment locations, carrying with them the training, equipment, and confidence Margaret had instilled in them. As she prepared for her own deployment to the Iraq sector, Margaret felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Operation Desert Shield would test everything she had learned about leadership, medicine, and military service. But more importantly, it would determine whether her vision of joint medical operations could succeed under the most challenging circumstances possible. As Margaret boarded the aircraft that would take her to Iraq, she carried with her the respect of every special operations unit she had served. The young Navy nurse who had started treating injured SEALs 23 years earlier had become a leader trusted by America's most elite warriors. But the most demanding phase of her career was just beginning, and the events of the coming weeks would determine not only the success of Operation Desert Shield, but also define Margaret's ultimate legacy in the special operations community. Operation Desert Shield launched at 0300 hours on a moonless night in September. Margaret's forward medical facility in western Iraq was positioned to support simultaneous raids on 3 terrorist training camps. Her team consisted of 12 medical personnel from all services, equipped with the most advanced field medical equipment available. The first casualties arrived within 2 hours of mission commencement. A Ranger squad had encountered heavier resistance than expected at their target location. The wounded Rangers were evacuated by Army helicopters to Margaret's facility, where her medical team immediately went to work. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the Ranger squad leader, had taken multiple gunshot wounds to his legs and abdomen. As Margaret worked to stabilize him, she could hear the professional calm in his voice as he continued to provide intelligence updates to his commanders despite his injuries. "Ma'am, the compound had more fighters than we expected," Rodriguez reported between medical procedures. "At least 30 combatants, well-armed and well-trained. My boys handled it, but 3 more of my Rangers are coming in behind me." Margaret split her attention between treating Rodriguez and preparing her facility to receive additional casualties. This was exactly the type of scenario she had trained her team to handle: multiple wounded from the same unit requiring simultaneous treatment, while maintaining readiness for additional casualties. The second wave of wounded Rangers arrived 20 minutes later. Margaret's team performed flawlessly, with Navy corpsmen and Army medics working side by side to provide life-saving care. The joint training had eliminated any hesitation or confusion between services. As Margaret worked on the most critically wounded ranger, her radio crackled with an urgent message from the command center. Medical 1, be advised SEAL Team 6 has encountered significant resistance. Multiple casualties inbound to your location. Margaret's heart sank. She knew most of the SEALs on Team 6 personally, having worked with them for years. But she couldn't allow personal feelings to affect her professional judgment. She began preparing additional treatment areas while her existing patients were stabilized. Master Chief Thompson's voice came over her earpiece, weak but unmistakable. Doc, it's Thompson. We're coming to you with 4 wounded, including our team leader. ETA 10 minutes. Copy, Chief. We're ready for you. Margaret replied, though her voice betrayed her concern for her longtime friend and colleague. Margaret quickly assessed her resources. She had multiple critically wounded rangers who couldn't be moved yet, and SEALs with unknown injuries incoming. Her facility was about to exceed its design capacity, requiring her to make difficult decisions about treatment priorities. When the SEAL helicopter landed, Margaret was shocked by what she saw. Lieutenant Commander Jackson, now the Team 6 leader, was unconscious and clearly in critical condition. Thompson was walking despite obvious injuries, helping to carry another wounded SEAL. Chief, you should be on a stretcher, Margaret said as Thompson helped bring casualties into the facility. Doc, my boys come first. You know that, Thompson replied, his voice strained but determined. Margaret made a split-second decision that demonstrated her growth as a leader. She assigned her most experienced Navy corpsman to treat Thompson while she personally focused on Jackson, whose injuries appeared life-threatening. Jackson had sustained a traumatic brain injury from an explosion, along with multiple fractures and internal bleeding. Margaret had to perform emergency surgery in a field environment with limited resources, knowing that any mistake could cost the life of a man she considered both a patient and a friend. As she worked on Jackson, Margaret could hear radio chatter indicating that the mission's third phase in Afghanistan was also encountering complications. Delta Force teams were requesting immediate medical evacuation for multiple casualties, but Margaret's facility in Iraq was the closest advanced medical capability. Medical 1, this is Command, came the voice of General Morrison over the radio. We need you to prepare for additional casualties from Afghanistan. Can you handle the load? Margaret looked around her facility, already filled with wounded rangers and SEALs receiving treatment. Accepting additional casualties would push her team and equipment beyond their limits, but she couldn't refuse when American lives were at stake. Command, Medical 1 copies. Send them to us. We'll find a way to handle it, she replied. The next 8 hours tested every aspect of Margaret's training, experience, and leadership abilities. Her facility treated 37 wounded special operations personnel from 4 different units, requiring complex medical procedures in a field environment, while managing limited resources and personnel. Margaret barely slept for 3 days as casualties continued arriving from various phases of Operation Desert Shield. Her medical team worked around the clock, with Margaret personally performing surgery on the most critical cases while coordinating treatment for dozens of other wounded warriors. On the 4th day, the last casualties were evacuated to higher levels of care, and Margaret finally had time to assess her team's performance. Despite being overwhelmed with casualties, they had achieved a 98% survival rate among patients who reached their facility alive. General Morrison arrived that evening to personally debrief Margaret and her team. The operation had been strategically successful, with all target objectives accomplished, but the high casualty rate had tested the medical support system to its limits. Commander Chin, General Morrison began. Your unit's performance during Operation Desert Shield has been exceptional. You handled a casualty load that exceeded your design capacity by 300% while maintaining the highest medical standards. Margaret felt pride in her team's accomplishment, but she was also exhausted emotionally and physically. The stress of treating so many wounded friends and colleagues had taken its toll, even on someone with her experience and mental toughness. Sir, we were just doing our job. These are our people, and they deserve the best care we can provide regardless of the circumstances," Margaret replied. The general nodded, understanding the dedication that drove Special Operations medical personnel to extraordinary performance. "Commander, there's something else we need to discuss. Your performance during this operation, combined with your overall career achievements, has resulted in a unique opportunity." Margaret listened with growing amazement as General Morrison outlined a promotion to Navy Captain and assignment as the first female Deputy Director of Medical Operations for Joint Special Operations Command. The position would make her responsible for medical support policies and procedures for all American Special Operations Forces worldwide. "Sir, I'm honored by the opportunity, but I want to make sure I'm the right person for this level of responsibility," Margaret said honestly. General Morrison smiled. "Commander, every Special Operations unit that has worked with you speaks of you with the highest respect. You've proven your medical expertise, your leadership abilities, and your courage under fire. More importantly, you've earned the trust of the warrior community in a way that very few medical officers ever achieve." 3 months later, Margaret found herself standing in the Pentagon briefing room where her journey with Joint Special Operations Command had begun. But now she was the senior medical officer responsible for developing policies that would affect thousands of Special Operations personnel worldwide. Her first major initiative was establishing permanent joint medical training centers at Special Operations bases around the world. These facilities would ensure that all Special Operations medical personnel received the same high-level training regardless of their service branch or deployment location. Margaret also developed new protocols for medical support during joint operations, standardizing equipment and procedures to eliminate the confusion that had initially hampered her training programs. These protocols became the model for medical operations across the entire Department of Defense. As Captain Chen settled into her new role, she maintained her commitment to frontline medical service by personally deploying on critical missions. Despite her senior position, Margaret insisted on staying connected to the operational level where her policies would be implemented. 2 years into her tenure as Deputy Director, Margaret received news that would define the culmination of her career. The Secretary of Defense was establishing a new position, Director of Special Operations Medicine, and Margaret was being nominated for the role. The Senate confirmation hearing was unlike anything Margaret had experienced in her military career. She sat before the Armed Services Committee, answering questions about her vision for Special Operations medical support, while representing not just her own achievements, but the capabilities of all military medical personnel. Senator Williams, the committee chairman, asked the question that would become the most memorable moment of the hearing. "Captain Chen, what qualifies you to be responsible for the medical welfare of America's most elite warriors?" Margaret thought about her journey from a young Navy nurse to her current position, remembering all the SEALs, Rangers, Delta operatives, and other Special Operations personnel she had served with over the years. "Senator, I've had the privilege of serving alongside America's finest warriors for over 25 years. They've taught me that true leadership comes from earning trust through shared sacrifice and proven competence. I've worked to earn that trust by being willing to go wherever they go and face whatever dangers they face to ensure they receive the medical care they've earned through their service." The confirmation was unanimous, making Margaret the first female Director of Special Operations Medicine and one of the highest-ranking medical officers in the Pentagon. On her first day in the new position, Margaret received a surprise visitor. Master Chief Thompson, now retired but still connected to the SEAL community, came to congratulate her on the appointment. "Doc, there's something we wanted to give you before you get too important to remember us enlisted folks," Thompson said with a grin, presenting Margaret with a wooden display case. Inside the case was a collection of unit patches from every Special Operations unit Margaret had served with during her career, along with a letter signed by dozens of current and former Special Operations personnel expressing their appreciation for her service. The letter's final paragraph brought tears to Margaret's eyes. "Ma'am, you've proven that excellence in medicine and courage under fire know no gender boundaries. You've earned our respect not because you're a woman in a male-dominated field, but because you're a warrior who happens to be a medical professional. We're proud to have served with you." 6 months later, Margaret was preparing for her retirement ceremony after 20 years of military service. The ceremony was held at the Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters, where her journey with the SEAL community had begun decades earlier. As Margaret walked through the building one final time in uniform, she reflected on how much had changed since she was a young lieutenant treating injured SEALs. The military had evolved to better recognize the contributions of women in combat support roles, but more importantly, the special operations community had learned to judge personnel by their competence and character rather than their gender. The retirement ceremony was attended by hundreds of current and former special operations personnel from all services. Margaret looked out at the audience and saw faces representing every phase of her career: SEALs she had treated as a young nurse, Rangers from Operation Desert Shield, Delta operatives from joint training exercises, and countless others whose lives she had touched through her service. Admiral Patterson, now retired himself but present for the ceremony, delivered the keynote address. Margaret Chin has demonstrated that leadership, courage, and medical excellence are qualities that transcend traditional boundaries. She has shown our community that the best medical officer is simply the one who provides the best care when it matters most. As the ceremony concluded and Margaret prepared to leave active duty, she was approached by dozens of special operations personnel who wanted to thank her personally for her service. But the moment that would stay with her forever came as she was walking toward the exit. Without any command or coordination, every Navy SEAL in attendance simultaneously came to attention and rendered a respectful salute. The gesture spread through the crowd until hundreds of America's most elite warriors were standing at attention, saluting a woman who had earned their ultimate respect through decades of dedicated service. "Ma'am," said a young SEAL petty officer she didn't recognize, "thank you for showing us what true courage looks like." As Margaret returned the salute and walked through the crowd of respectful warriors, she realized that her greatest accomplishment wasn't the medals, promotions, or positions she had earned. It was the trust and respect of the men and women who represented the very best of American military service. Margaret Chin had entered the military as a young nurse hoping to serve her country. She was leaving as a pioneering leader who had redefined what it meant to be a military medical officer and had proven that excellence in service knows no boundaries when it's backed by competence, courage, and unwavering dedication to those who put their lives on the line for freedom. The young lieutenant who had first treated injured SEALs in a San Diego hospital had become a woman whose legacy would inspire generations of military medical personnel to come. And in the end, that legacy was built on a simple foundation: earning respect through service, one patient at a time.